you haven't, you're in for quite a treat. And I'm Jerry Dorman, and I wanted to remind you that this series is Monday through Thursday night at 7 o'clock, so it's all in 1 week. And while Don is speaking, if you have questions, you can put it in the chat, and at the end of his talk, he'll go through the chat and check out your questions and answer them. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Don. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. For those of you who have not attended any previous lectures of mine, let me introduce myself. I am a emeritus of the history department at Cal State Long Beach. And since my retirement, I've been giving lectures on historical topics to audiences of people like yourselves, people who were always interested in history and perhaps didn't have the opportunity to take history classes. And so I'm very happy to present this series of lectures on the life and times of Alexander Hamilton. This is my first evening Zoom lecture. So this is something new for all of us. And as Jerry mentioned, it's going to be over the next 4 days from 7 till approximately 8:15, or we might even go beyond that, depending on the content of each lecture. Let me just point out my attire. So I don't know if you can see this, but
Oh, Don.
Attended
I'm sorry, I muted you.
The Broadway play. So this series of lectures is devoted to the life and times of Alexander Hamilton in recognition of the musical that is currently showing on Disney+. So I hope you've had a chance to tune into that. Now, I'm going to be interspersing lyrics and music from the show, but I have to mention that the show contains 51 songs. It's not possible to include all the songs in these 4 lectures. But I want to say something about the historical accuracy of the lyrics. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote and starred in the show, based it on a biography of Alexander Hamilton by historian Ron Chernow. Now, at times, he did take literary license that departs from the historical narrative, but that's rather rare. And when he does do that, I will be pointing it out where he strays from the historical narrative. So let's begin. Few figures in American history have aroused more admiration and more loathing than Alexander Hamilton. In high school or college, you may have been introduced to the comparison between Jeffersonian democracy versus Hamiltonian aristocracy. In that dichotomy, Jefferson comes off as the defender of the common man working on God's land, and Hamilton as contemptuous of the masses, sort of a closet monarchist representing only the interests of the rich and powerful. And so how strange it is that a musical has been produced on the life of Alexander Hamilton with a cast composed mostly of minorities, and a play that lionizes Hamilton as the champion of immigrants, and which employs hip-hop music, hardly the language of upper crust society. Now, Alexander Hamilton was a complex individual who had an enormous impact on the early development of the American Republic. And undoubtedly, he was the foremost political figure who never became president. In fact, aside from Benjamin Franklin, Hamilton is the only non-president whose face appears on our currency. Yet his influence was greater than most presidents by creating financial programs and institutions that are really indispensable today, such as a budget system, a funded debt, a system of taxation, a central bank, a customs service, and a Coast Guard. All of these were created by Alexander Hamilton. In addition, he was at the center of American politics during the critical revolutionary period and in the decades following independence. He was a pivotal force in the presidential administrations of Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, crafting the political, military, and economic development of the young nation. In fact, he played a part in virtually every major event that created the American nation. Yet no other founding father came from more difficult circumstances and had to overcome more obstacles than Alexander Hamilton. His story is more than just rags to riches. It's a narrative of how someone of insignificant origins overcame shame and misery to become an instrumental figure in shaping the world's greatest experiment in democratic government. But Hamilton's brilliance was often marred by controversy and scandal. Some historians described him as the least loved of all the founding fathers. So in these 4 lectures, I hope to answer the following questions. What was it that spurred Hamilton's driving ambition? How did he shape the history of the early republic? Why was he hated by so many of his contemporaries? And finally, what was his legacy? Now, while other founding fathers were born in small New England villages or on large Virginia estates, Hamilton, in the words of his biographer Ron Chernow, grew up in a tropical hellhole of dissipated whites and fractious slaves. He was born on the island of Nevis in the British West Indies, and historians aren't even sure what year he was born. Some say 1755, others say 1757. We will use the 1755 date as his origin. Now, the British colony of Nevis was populated by vagabonds and criminals who were sent from the streets of London to work as indentured servants. And the island was also populated by slaves brought over from Africa. Hamilton's mother, Rachel Fawcett, left her husband, James Lavian, who had defamed her as an adulteress, and she fled the marriage without seeking a divorce because divorce was expensive and complicated in the British Crown colonies at that time. Rachel then took up with a luckless and impoverished Scotsman by the name of James Hamilton. And with James Hamilton, she had 2 children, James Jr. and Alexander, both born out of wedlock, which meant they were bastards. And throughout his life, Alexander Hamilton had to deal with the shame and stigma of his illegitimate birth. Now, James Hamilton soon deserted the family, leaving Rachel to bring up the 2 boys by herself. She moved to the island of St. Croix, which was then a possession of Denmark. In 1768, she contracted a severe fever, which her son Alexander also caught. And the 2 of them, Rachel and her son Alexander, lay in bed together, treated with the bloodletting and heavy laxatives that were medical science of the day, until the mother died next to her son, soaked in her own blood and vomit, leaving Alexander Hamilton an orphan at the age of 13. Alexander and his brother were then placed under the guardianship of a 32-year-old cousin by the name of Peter Lytton. But the following year, Peter Lytton committed suicide, leaving James, age 16, and Alexander, age 14, alone and penniless. So, just to review Alexander Hamilton's childhood. Born in 1755 to James Hamilton and Rachel Fawcett, who were not married. Family moved to St. Croix in 1765. The father abandoned the family in 1766. The mother died in 1768. Alexander and his brother are placed under the guardianship of a cousin who then commits suicide. As a bastard, Hamilton was prohibited from attending a Christian school, and he had no rights of inheritance. It's hard to imagine a more abominable and difficult childhood. In the 18th century, we should keep in mind that everything revolved around birth and breeding and pedigree. And so, his illegitimacy had a profound psychological effect on Alexander Hamilton. It was considered the most dishonored state, and it produced in Hamilton a lifelong obsession with honor. Although Hamilton's illegitimate birth barred him from formal schooling, he may have received individual tutoring from his mother, who was of French Huguenot background. But for the most part, Alexander Hamilton was self-taught. As a result, he became fluent in both English and French, and he developed a voracious appetite for reading. He was also tutored by a Jewish woman who taught him to read the Ten Commandments in Hebrew. And that raises the question, was Alexander Hamilton Jewish? Was his mother's husband, a Danish merchant by the name of Johann Michael Lavienne, Jewish? Was Lavienne a version of Levine? Now, Hamilton's biographer, Ron Chernow, wrote that Lavienne could have been a variant of Levine, but there's no evidence that Lavienne was Jewish. In 2019, Andrew Porwancher, a professor at the University of Oklahoma, wrote The Jewish Founding Father, Alexander Hamilton's Hidden Life. Porwancher suggests that Hamilton's mother may have converted to Judaism when she married Lavienne. The fact that no baptismal records exist, either for Alexander Hamilton or for his brother, and that Hamilton attended a Jewish school where he recited the Ten Commandments in Hebrew, and that in his adult life, he was outspoken in his defense of Jews, advocating tolerance and representing Jewish clients in his law practice. All of that leads Porwancher to speculate that Hamilton may have been Jewish, but he cut off his ties to Judaism after his mother died because he thought that that would further his ambitions. Now, while Porwancher's thesis is enticing, none of the evidence he cites about Hamilton's Jewishness is decisive. And so, at this point, in answer to the question, was Alexander Hamilton Jewish? Unless more compelling evidence is produced, the answer is probably not. Now, as a young teenager, Alexander began to clerk in a mercantile house owned by two New York traders. And it was there that he was introduced to the world of commerce and international finance, working in this trading house in the island of Nevis and then St. Croix. Now, the economies of those islands were based on sugarcane, and 80% of the population was made up of African slaves. And as a result, Hamilton witnessed scenes of incredible brutality against slaves. And throughout his life, he regarded slavery as an appalling degradation. He carried this antipathy for slavery throughout his life. Now, following his cousin Peter Lytton's death, Alexander was sheltered by a man by the name of Thomas Stevens, a well-respected merchant. And there was a remarkable physical resemblance between Thomas Stevens' son, Edward, and Alexander Hamilton. Some historians have speculated that Alexander was actually the biological son of Stevens, which might explain why Stevens took him in, and it might explain Rachel's estrangement from her first husband and from James Hamilton, if she was having an affair with Thomas Stevens. Letters written by Alexander as a clerk revealed that he had considerable knowledge of accounting, economics, finance, insurance, marketing, and management. Nevertheless, as a young teenager, he was consumed with his lowly station in life. At the age of 14, he wrote to a friend, "My ambition is so prevalent that I disdain the groveling conditions of a clerk to which my fortune condemns me. I would willingly risk my life, though not my character, to exalt my station. My folly makes me ashamed, yet we know that such schemes can triumph when the schemer is resolute." And then he finishes with this curious statement, "Oh, how I wish there was a war." And the reason he included that was that he felt that in a war, he would have the opportunity to prove his talents. Now, although he was hindered by his lowly status in what was then a rigid class society that allowed little opportunity for social mobility, a natural calamity proved to be his salvation. On August 31st, 1772, a devastating hurricane tore through the island of St. Croix, leaving in its wake a swath of destruction. The 17-year-old Hamilton wrote a description of the storm, and that description was published in a local newspaper, which generated a sensation. He wrote, "The horrors of the night, the prospect of an immediate cruel death, or as one may say, of being crushed by the Almighty in his anger, filled us with terror, and everything that had tended to weaken our interest with him upbraided us in the strongest colors with our baseness and folly. That which in a calm, unruffled temper we call a natural cause seemed then like the correction of the deity." Keep in mind that he's writing this at the age of 17. "But see, the Lord relents. He hears our prayers. The lightning ceases, the winds are appeased, the warring elements are reconciled, and all things promise peace. The darkness is dispelled, and drooping nature revives at the approaching dawn." Well, one reader, this was published in the American Gazette, and one reader commented, "For all its bombastic excesses, it does seem wondrous that a self-educated clerk could write with such verve and gusto." And this essay impressed community leaders in St. Croix, and they took up a collection to send Hamilton to the North American colonies to further his education. He set sail in October of 1772, determined to forge a new identity, unhampered by the stain of his illegitimacy. So, keeping all of these facts in mind, we are now going to turn to the first track in the musical, in a song entitled Alexander Hamilton.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean, by providence impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a self-starter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter,
And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter.
Then a hurricane came and devastation reigned. Our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and there's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait, just you wait.
When he was 10, his father split, full of it, debt-ridden. 2 years later, see Alex and his mother bedridden, half dead, sitting in their own sick, the scent thick. And Alex got better, but his mother went quick.
Moved in with a cousin, the cousin committed suicide. Left him with nothing but ruined pride. Something new inside, a voice saying, Alex, you gotta fend for yourself. He started retreating and reading every treatise on the shelf.
There would have been nothing left to do for someone less astute. He would have been dead and destitute without a cent or restitution. Started working for his late mother's landlord, trading sugar cane and rum and all the things he can't afford. Scamming for every book he can get his hands on. Planning for the future, see him now as he stands on the bow of a ship headed for a new land. In New York, you can be a new man.
New York, you can
Just
be a new way. New York, you can
Just
be a new man. New York, you can be a new man. New York, just you wait. Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton.
You're waiting in the wings for you.
Waiting in the wings.
You never back down. You never learn to take your time. Oh, Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton.
America sings for you.
Will they know what you overcame?
Will they know you rewrote the game? The world will never be the same. Oh,
Ship is in the harbor now, see if you can spot him. Another immigrant coming up from the bottom. His enemies destroyed his rep, America forgot him. We fought with him. Me, I died for him. Me, I trusted him.
Me, I loved him.
And me, I'm the damn fool that shot him.
there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait.
What's your name, man?
Alexander Hamilton.
Okay, so you get a flavor of how the musical accurately represents the facts of Alexander Hamilton's life. And in this first number, we're introduced to major figures such as Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Hamilton's closest friends, John Laurens, and also Eliza, who would become Hamilton's wife. Now, upon his arrival in the American colonies in October of 1773, he studied at an academy in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in preparation for college work. His attendance at the academy put him in touch with Aaron Burr, who had studied at the same school but several years earlier. At the age of 18, Hamilton applied for admission to the College of New Jersey, which we know today as Princeton University. Now, the average age for an incoming freshman at that time at Princeton was 15 years of age. Hamilton found out that Princeton had allowed Burr to complete the required 3 years of study in just 2 years. So he asked for the same accommodation, but he was turned down by Princeton. And so he enrolled in King's College in 1773 in New York City. Today, King's College is Columbia University. And so going to King's College placed him in a city that was the center of commerce and also, by 1773, the center of revolutionary ferment against British rule. And that leads us to the second track in the musical called Aaron Burr, Sir.
1776. New York City.
Pardon me, are you Aaron Burr, sir?
That depends. Who's asking?
Oh, well, sure. Sir, I'm Alexander Hamilton. I'm at your service, sir. I have been looking for you.
I'm getting nervous.
Sir, I heard your name at Princeton. I was seeking an accelerated course of study. When I got sort of out of sorts with a buddy of yours, I may have punched him. It's a blur. Sir, he handles the financials.
You punched the bursar.
Yes, I wanted to do what you did, graduate in 2 and join the revolution. He looked at me like I was stupid. I'm not stupid. So how'd you do it? How'd you graduate so fast?
It was my parents' dying wish before they passed.
You're an orphan. Of course, I'm an orphan. God, I wish there was a war, then we could prove that we're worth more than anyone bargained for.
Can I buy you a drink?
That would be nice.
While we're talking, let me offer you some free advice. Talk less.
What?
Smile more.
Huh.
Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for.
You can't be serious.
You wanna get ahead.
Yes.
Fools who run their mouths off wind up dead.
Yo, what time is it? Showtime!
Like I said.
Showtime, yo! I'm John Lawrence in the place to be. 2 pints of Sam Adams, but I'm working on 3. Ha. Those redcoats don't want it with me, cause I will pack, chick-a-prack these cops till I'm free.
Eh oui, oui, mon ami, je m'appelle Lafayette, the Lancelot of the revolutionary set. I came from afar just to say bonsoir to the king, cause it's toi who is the best, c'est moi.
Brah, brah, I am Hercules Mulligan, up in it, loving it. Yes, I heard your mother said, come again. Lock up your daughters and horses. Of course, it's hard to have intercourse over 4 sets of corsets.
Wow.
No more sex, pour me another brew, son. Let's raise a couple more to the revolution. Well, if it ain't the prodigy of Princeton College, Aaron Burr, give us a verse, drop some knowledge.
Good luck with that, you're taking a stand. You spit, I'ma sit, we'll see where we land.
The revolution's imminent, what do you stall for?
If you stand for nothing, Burr, what'll you fall for?
Who are you? Who are you?
Who are you? Who is this kid? What's he gonna do?
I am not
Okay, so once again, we're introduced to some of the main characters throughout the play, many of whom are Hamilton's friends. Now, there's a reference that Hamilton punched the bursar when he tried to enroll at Princeton. That's not true. That's literary license that Lin-Manuel Miranda took. So, upon his arrival in New York City, Alexander Hamilton was about to make his mark on history. He had been rescued from tropical obscurity by a series of benefactors who came to regard him as a prodigy. Ashamed of his background, his was the classic immigrant story of someone who reinvents himself and never looks back. He stood 5'7" tall, of fair complexion, auburn hair, with deep blue piercing eyes. His trademark was an assurance bordering on arrogance, vain, indiscreet, and opinionated. John Adams, our second president, called Alexander Hamilton that bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. His ambition, his restlessness, and all his grandiose schemes come, I'm convinced, from a superabundance of secretions, which he couldn't find enough whores to absorb. That was not a compliment from John Adams. The fact is, Hamilton did have an ambition that thirsted for fame and glory and power. He also had a conspicuous sense of self-possession, a writing and a speaking style that would one day make him the most feared polemicist in America. And he came across as a man's man, and some women found him irresistible. And all this from a penniless immigrant, 19-year-old college student of questionable origins, recently arrived from the West Indies. There was also a reckless side to Hamilton. He enjoyed courting danger. Remember, at the age of 14, he wrote, "I wish there was a war." He clearly had traveled a longer road than any other prominent member of the revolutionary generation. And he also had a keen sense of where history was headed. The war that he had so fervently desired was on the horizon, as tensions were growing between Britain and its American colonies. The Boston Tea Party had taken place in December 1773, shortly after Hamilton was enrolled in college. And Hamilton threw himself into the cause of American independence. He was convinced that the Americans could win a war by using unconventional tactics that would erode Britain's will to fight. The first occasion where he unveiled his political convictions came in July of 1774, when he delivered an impromptu speech in which he endorsed the Boston Tea Party. He deplored the closure of Boston's port by Great Britain, and he endorsed a unified stance against the British because of their unfair taxation. When his speech ended, the crowd was transfixed, stunned by this spellbinding young orator. And from that point on, he was treated as a youthful hero of the cause of independence. He further distinguished himself by writing a 35-page pamphlet in a retort against someone named Samuel Seabury. Seabury was a loyalist, that is, he was an American colonist who supported Great Britain. Seabury argued that farmers would be hurt in a war with Britain because the British would impose a boycott against agricultural products. And Seabury was afraid that the Continental Congress would declare American independence from Britain. And so Hamilton wrote this pamphlet entitled "The Farmer Refuted." The 18-year-old Hamilton countered that Britain violated the natural rights of mankind by imposing taxes on Americans without their consent. So this debate between Hamilton and Samuel Seabury is the content of a song in the musical called "Farmer Refuted."
Hear ye! Hear ye! My name is Samuel Seabury, and I present free thoughts on the proceedings of the Continental Congress. Heed not the rabble who scream revolution. They have not your interest at heart.
My God, tear this dude apart.
Chaos and bloodshed are not a solution. Don't let them lead you astray. This Congress does not speak for me.
That indeed.
They're playing a dangerous game. I pray the king shows you his mercy. For shame, for shame.
Yeah.
Heed not
You
the
all unravel
rabble
at the sound of
scream,
screams, but the revolution is coming.
They have not
gonna
your
win.
interest at
It's hard
heart.
to listen to you with a straight face.
Chaos and bloodshed
already
are
hard
not
to solve
a solution.
and even talk.
Don't
And
let
what
them
about
lead
Boston?
you
Look at the cost and
astray.
all that we've lost, and you talk
This
about
Congress does not speak for
My
me.
dog speaks more eloquently
They're
than
playing a dangerous game.
strangely. Your mange is
I
the
pray the
same.
king shows you his mercy.
Is he in Jersey?
For shame, for the revolution. For shame. Plead
Repeat repeat yourself again, I'm gonna scream. Honestly, look at me, please don't read.
Not your interest.
Don't modulate the key, then not debate with me. Why should a tiny island across the sea regulate the price of tea?
Alexander, please.
Bert, I'd rather be divisive than indecisive. Drop the niceties. Silence on the city's.
Now, while Hamilton supported the revolution, he was very fearful that popular sentiment might boil over into dangerous excess. He was afraid that the same passions that aimed to topple British tyranny might also lead to mob rule. At one point, Hamilton rescued Miles Cooper, who was the pro-British president of King's College, and a mob threatened to kill him, and Hamilton rescued Cooper. And so Hamilton's horror of mob disorder foreshadowed his extremely negative reaction some years later when France arose in revolution. So Hamilton supported insurrection against Great Britain, but he also worried about the long-term effect of habitual disorder, especially among the uneducated masses. He recognized that greater freedom could also lead to greater disorder. And throughout his life, he tried to resolve this contradiction, to balance liberty on the one hand and order on the other hand. It was just around the time of the Revolution that Hamilton began to attract a circle of devoted friends who would help propel his political career. One of these friends was John Lawrence, a wealthy and influential South Carolinian, and he formed an inseparable bond with Hamilton. They shared an idealism about the revolution, but also about ending slavery, as did the Marquis de Lafayette, a young French aristocrat who came to America to enlist in the Continental Army, and a tailor by the name of Hercules Mulligan, who would become Hamilton's lifelong friend. So the friendship between Hamilton, Lorenz, Mulligan, and Lafayette was cemented by their common devotion to the revolutionary cause. Hamilton's ambition, his commitment to independence, and his bond with these men were expressed in another song called "I Am Not Throwing Away My Shot."
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. And yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I'ma get a scholarship to King's College. I probably shouldn't brag, but dag, I'm amazed and astonished. The problem is I got a lot of brains, but no polish. I gotta holler just to be heard with every word. I drop knowledge. I'm a diamond in the rough, a shining piece of coal, trying to reach my goal. My power of speech, unimpeachable. Only 19, but my mind is older. These New York City streets get colder. I shoulder every burden, every disadvantage I've learned to manage. I don't have a gun to brandish. I walk these streets famished. The plan is to fan this spark into a flame. But damn, it's getting dark, so let me spell out the name. I am the A-L-E-X-A-N-D-E-R. We are meant to be a colony that runs independently. Meanwhile, Britain keeps shitting on us endlessly. Essentially, they tax us relentlessly. Then King George turns around, runs a spending spree. He ain't never gonna set his descendants free. So there will be a revolution in this century. Enter me.
He says in parentheses.
Don't be shocked when your history book mentions me. I will lay down my life if it sets us free. Eventually, you'll see my ascendancy. And I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. And yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. And yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. It's time to take a shot.
I dream of life without a monarchy. The unrest in France will lead to anarchy. Anarchy, how you say? Anarchy. When I fight, I make the other side panicky with my shot.
Yo, I'm a tailor's apprentice, and I got y'all knuckleheads and local parentis. I'm joining a rebellion, cause I know it's my chance to socially advance. Instead of sewing some pants, I'm gon' take a shot.
And but we'll never be truly free until those in bondage have the same rights as you and me. You and I do or die. Wait till I sally in on a stallion with the first black battalion. Have another shot. Geniuses, lower your voices. You keep out of trouble and you double your choices. I'm with you, but the situation is fraught. You've got to be carefully taught. If you talk, you're gonna get shot.
Bird, check what we got. Mr. Lafayette, hard rock like Lancelot. I think your pants look hot. Lawrence, I like you a lot. Let's hatch a plot blacker than the kettle calling the pot. What are the odds of God who put us all in one spot? Pop in a squad of conventional wisdom like it or not. A bunch of revolutionary manumission abolitionists. Give me a position, show me where the ammunition is. Oh, am I talking too loud? Sometimes I get overexcited, shoot off at the mouth. I never had a group of friends before. I promise that I'll make y'all proud.
Let's get this guy in front of a crowd.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. Everybody sing, whoa, 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 hey, whoa.
On your knees, you rise up. Tell your brother that he's gotta rise up. Tell your sister that she's gotta rise up.
When are these colonies gonna rise up? 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 Rise up.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. When's it gonna get me? In my sleep, 7 feet ahead of me. If I see it coming, do I run or do I let it be? Is it like a beat without a melody? See, I never thought I'd live past 20. Where I come from, some get half as many. Ask anybody why we living fast and we laugh, reach for a flash. We have to make this moment last. That's plenty. Scratch that. This is not a moment, it's the movement. Where all the hungriest brothers with something to prove went. Foes oppose us. We take an honest stand. We roll like Moses, claiming our promised land. And if we win our independence, is that a guarantee of freedom for our descendants? Or will the blood we shed begin an endless cycle of vengeance and death with no defendants? I know the action in the street is exciting, but Jesus, between all the bleeding and fighting, I've been reading and writing. We need to handle our financial situation. Are we a nation of states? What's the state of our nation? I'm past patiently waiting, I'm passionately smashing every expectation, every action's an act of creation. I'm laughing in the face of casualties of sorrow. For the first time I'm thinking past tomorrow. And I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey, yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. We gonna rise up, time to take a shot. We gonna rise up, time to take a shot. We gonna rise up, rise up. It's time to take a shot. Rise up, rise up. It's time to take a shot. Rise up. It's time to take a shot. Rise up. Take a shot, shot, shot. Hey, yo, it's time to take a shot. Time to take a shot. And I am not throwing away my shot.
Okay. Whew. I'm exhausted from that song. In 1775, after the first engagement of American troops with the British at Lexington and Concord, Hamilton undertook a comprehensive military education on his own, mastering infantry drills and military tactics. He interrupted his studies at King's College and joined a New York volunteer militia company. And so he never graduated from King's College, although Columbia University today counts Hamilton as one of its distinguished alumni. In response to the question of how a citizen army could possibly defeat the world's most powerful military force at that time, the 18-year-old Hamilton responded, "There is a certain enthusiasm in liberty that makes human nature rise above itself in acts of bravery and heroism. The circumstances of our country put it in our power to evade a pitched battle. It will be better policy to harass and exhaust the soldiery by frequent skirmishes and incursions than to take the open field with them. In other words, he was advocating guerrilla warfare against the regular British troops. And so he came up with this strategy, never to face the more numerous enemy frontally, but rather to engage in guerrilla-type warfare, to harass and wear down the larger conventional force that would eventually erode the enemy's will to fight. And those very tactics did result in victory. And in March of 1776, he joined the Continental Army as captain of an artillery company. That was the oldest unit in the American Army, and it continues today. Hamilton's unit, the 1st Battalion, 5th Field Artillery, still exists today, the only unit left over from the Revolutionary War. And in July 1776, the colonies declared its independence. The war that Hamilton had wished for as a boy had now begun in earnest. And that war was denounced by Britain's King George III in one of the most memorable songs.
You say the price of my love is not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back, soon you'll see. You remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Cause you're my favorite subject, my sweet submissive subject, my loyal royal subject, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'll be back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war for your love, for your praise, and I'll love you till my dying days. When you're gone, I'll go mad, so don't throw away this thing we had. Cause when push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Everybody. Da 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 da. Da 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 da.
Now, Alexander Hamilton played a more important role in the war for American independence than most historians give him credit for. And that's somewhat understandable given his astonishing achievements that he accomplished after the war. That shouldn't overshadow his outstanding military career. The war went badly at first for the colonists as the British advanced on New York City, forcing a disorderly retreat by the rebels. But Hamilton maintained discipline in his company amid the chaos, and George Washington took notice. Several generals had asked Hamilton to serve as their aide, but Hamilton turned them down because he believed that his best chance for improving his station in life was to win glory on the battlefield. But then Hamilton received an invitation he felt he could not refuse. In March of 1777, Washington plucked Hamilton from the ranks and asked him to serve as his personal aide-de-camp at the rank of lieutenant colonel. And that was an invitation that Hamilton could not turn down. And that leads us to the next song called Right Hand Man.
British Admiral Howe's got troops on the water. 32,000 troops in New York Harbor. 32,000 troops in New York Harbor. They surround our troops, they surround our troops, they surround our troops.
As a kid in the Caribbean, I wished for a war. I knew that I was poor, I knew it was the only way to rise up. If they tell my story, I am either gonna die on the battlefield in glory or rise up. I will fight for this land, but there's only one man who can give us a command so we can rise up. Understand, it's the only way to rise up, rise up. Here he comes.
Here comes the general.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Here comes the general.
the moment you've been waiting for.
Here comes the general.
The pride of Mount Vernon.
Here comes the general.
George Washington.
We are outgunned, outmanned, outnumbered, outplanned. We gotta make an all-out stand. Hey yo, I'm gonna need a right-hand man. Check it. Can I be real a second? For just a millisecond, let down my guard and tell the people how I feel a second. Now I'm the model of a modern major general, the venerated Virginian veteran whose men are all lining up to put me up on a pedestal, writing letters to relatives, embellishing my elegance and eloquence. But the elephant is in the room, the truth is in your face when you hear the British cannons go boom. Any hope of success is fleeting. How can I keep leading when the people I'm leading keep retreating? We put a stop to the bleeding as the British take Brooklyn. Night takes Rook, but look, we are outgunned, outmanned, outnumbered, outplanned. We gotta make an all-out stand. Hey yo, I'm gonna need a right-hand man. Incoming! They're battering down the battery, check the damages. We gotta stop them and rob them of their advantages. Let's take a stand with the stamina God has granted us. Hamilton won't abandon ship, yo, let's steal their cannon. Shaboom! Goes the cannon, watch the blood in this shit spray. And goes the cannon, we're abandoning Kips Bay. And there's another shipping, we just lost Southern tipping. We gotta run to Harlem quick, we can't afford another slip. Guns and horses giddy up, I decide to divvy up my forces. This skittish as the British cut the city up. This close to giving up, facing mass scrutiny. I scream in the face of this mass mutiny. Are these the men with which I am to defend America? We ride at midnight, Manhattan in the distance. I cannot be everywhere at once, people. I'm in dire need of assistance.
Your Excellency, sir.
Who are you?
Aaron Burr, sir. Permission to state my case.
As you were.
Sir, I was a captain under General Montgomery until he caught a bullet in the neck in Quebec. And well, in summary, I think that I could be of some assistance. I admire how you keep firing on the British from a distance. I have some questions, a couple of suggestions on how to fight instead of fleeing west.
Yes?
Well,
Your Excellency, you wanted to see me. Hamilton, come in. Have you met Burr? Yes, sir. We keep meeting.
As I was saying, sir, I look forward to seeing your strategy play out.
Burr,
Sir.
close the door on your way out. Have I done something wrong, sir? On the contrary, I called you here because our odds are beyond scary. Your reputation precedes you, but I have to laugh. Sir? Hamilton, how come no one can get you on their staff? Sir! Don't get me wrong, you're a young man of great renown. I know you stole British cannons when we were still downtown. Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox wanted to hire you.
To be their secretary, I don't think so.
Now why are you upset?
I'm not.
It's all right you want to fight, you've got a hunger. I was just like you when I was younger. Head full of fantasies of dying like a martyr.
Yes.
Dying is easy, young man. Living is harder.
Why are you telling me this?
I'm being honest. I'm working with a third of what our Congress has promised. We are a powder keg about to explode. I need someone like you to lighten the load. So,
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. And yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry.
I am not throwing away my shot.
son, we are outgunned, outmatched.
You need all the help you can get. I have some friends. Lawrence Mulligan, Marquis de Lafayette. Okay, what else?
Outnumbered, outplanned.
I need some spies on the inside. Some kingsmen who might let some things slide. I'll write to Congress and tell them we need supplies. You rally the guys, master the element of surprise. I'll rise above my station, organize your information till we rise to the occasion of our new nation. So,
Here comes the general.
rise up.
What? Here comes the general.
Rise up.
What? Here comes the general.
Rise up.
What? Here comes the general.
What?
And his right-hand man. Boom!
So this is yet another example of a benefactor who came to recognize Alexander Hamilton as a prodigy. In fewer than 5 years, Hamilton had risen from a despondent clerk in St. Croix to become an aide to the most famous man in America, George Washington. While Hamilton accepted his new post, he really did so reluctantly. He craved for the battlefield, and he didn't want a job that would chain him to a desk. So from 1779 onwards, Hamilton badgered Washington for an independent command to lead troops into battle. But Washington refused, arguing that Hamilton was an invaluable member of his staff. Now, Washington and Hamilton had complementary talents over their 22 years together that would prove consequential to the early history of the American Republic. The general possessed sterling character and outstanding judgment, but he lacked the intellectual acumen of the other founding fathers. After all, John Adams went to Harvard, Thomas Jefferson went to William and Mary, but Washington, he only had gone to war. Hamilton contributed philosophical depth, administrative expertise, and a comprehensive knowledge of policy. But Washington saw that the volatile Hamilton needed a steady, guiding hand. Washington, who had no biological children of his own, looked upon Hamilton as a surrogate son, and the two proved to be an unbeatable team. And significantly, both of them grew impatient with the incompetence of the Continental Congress, and they both recognized the need for a much stronger central government. As Washington's emissary, Hamilton handled letters to Congress, to state governors, and the most powerful generals in the Continental Army. He drafted many of Washington's orders, and he was involved in a wide variety of high-level duties, including intelligence, diplomacy, and negotiating with senior Army officers. Hamilton also had a way with women. Martha Washington had an amorous tomcat that she nicknamed Hamilton. Early in 1780, Hamilton met Elizabeth Schuyler, the daughter of General Philip Schuyler, a wealthy New York State landowner. And his meeting with Elizabeth Schuyler is the content of a song in the musical entitled A Winter's Ball.
How does a bastard, orphan, Son of a whore, go on and on, grow into more of a phenomenon. Watch this obnoxious, arrogant, loudmouth bother. Be seated at the right hand of the Father. Washington hires Hamilton right on sight, but Hamilton still wants to fight, not right. Now Hamilton's skill with the quill is undeniable, but what do we have in common? We're reliable with the ladies. There are so many to deflower. Ladies. Looks, proximity to power. Ladies. They delighted and distracted. And Martha Washington named her feral tomcat after him.
That's true.
1780, a winter's ball, and the Schuyler sisters are the envy of all. Yo, if you could marry a sister, you're rich, son.
Is it a question of if, Burr, or which one?
Hey,
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 hey, hey, hey.
Alexander was instantly smitten by Liza, as he called her, and they were married in December of 1780. And so the 25-year-old orphaned immigrant had become part of a well-established, prosperous clan. Alexander also grew very close to Angelica Schuyler, Liza's older sister, leading some people to speculate on Hamilton's married life as a curious menage a trois with two sisters who are only a year apart. But there's no conclusive evidence that Hamilton's relationship with Angelica was ever physical or ever went beyond a strong affinity between in-laws. Hamilton's relationship with his father-in-law was particularly rewarding. General Philip Schuyler was one of the richest men in the country. Both Hamilton and Schuyler spoke French, and they were both well-read. And they shared a common loyalty to Washington. And they were both impatient with the incompetence of the Continental Congress. Elizabeth and Alexander Hamilton had 8 children, although only 2 appear in the musical. She would eventually outlive her husband by 50 years. Now, as the war drew nearer to an end, Hamilton knew that his opportunity for military glory was diminishing. He needed active duty to prove himself an honorable leader of men, and so that he could rise in his station in life. In July of 1781, Washington finally relented to Hamilton's yearnings for a field command, and he allowed Hamilton to take a leading part in the Battle of Yorktown. Now, the Battle of Yorktown would be the final battle of the Revolutionary War. And so in that campaign, Hamilton was reunited with his friends, John Laurens, Lafayette, and the tailor named Hercules Mulligan. I'm going to bypass some of these songs because it's just not possible to do all the songs. So Hamilton finally got his field command, and he led a charge of several hundred soldiers at the Battle of Yorktown. What's really interesting about this charge is he ordered that his soldiers remove bullets from their bayonet rifles because he wanted to surprise the British and wanted to avoid an accidental discharge that might betray their actions. Yorktown was the decisive battle in which the British finally surrendered. The small band of colonists ultimately defeated the greatest military force on earth. It was as if the world was turned upside down. And that is the title of the final song that we are going to listen to tonight, called Yorktown, the World Turned Upside Down.
The Battle of Yorktown, 1781.
Monsieur Hamilton.
Monsieur Lafayette.
In command where you belong.
Are you saying no sweat? We're finally on the field, we've had quite a run.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
So what happens if we win?
I go back to France. I bring freedom to my people if I'm given the chance.
We'll be with you when you do.
Go, lead your man.
I'll see you on the other side.
Till we meet again.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Hey yo, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. Till the world turns upside down.
Till the world turns upside down.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. This is where it gets me. On my feet, the enemy ahead of me. If this is the end of me, at least I have a friend with me. Weapon in my hand, a command of my men with me. Then I remember my Eliza is expecting me. Not only that, my Eliza is expecting. We gotta go, gotta get the job done. Gotta start a new nation, gotta meet my son. Take the bullets out your gun, the bullets out your gun. We move undercover and we move as one. Through the night, we have one shot to live another day. We cannot let a stray gunshot give us away. We will fight up close, seize the moment and stay in it. It's either that or meet the business end of a bayonet. The code word is Rochambeau. Dig me? Rochambeau. You have your orders now, go man, go. And so the American experiment begins with my friends all scattered to the winds. Lawrence is in South Carolina, redefining bravery. We'll never be free until we end slavery. When we finally drive the British away, Lafayette is there waiting in Chesapeake Bay. How did we know that this plan would work? We had a spy on the inside, that's right. Hercules Mulligan!
Tell a spy on the British government. I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it to my brother's revolutionary covenant. I'm running with the Sons of Liberty, and I am loving it. See, that's what happens when you up against the ruffians. We in the shit now, somebody's gotta shovel it. Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction. When you knock me down, I get the fuck back up again.
After a week of fighting, a young man in a red coat stands on a parapet.
We lower our guns as he frantically waves that white handkerchief.
And just like that, it's over. We tend to our wounded. We count our dead. Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom. Not yet.
We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile. We escort their men out of Yorktown. They stagger home single file. Tens of thousands of people flood the streets. There are screams and church bells ringing. And as our fallen foes retreat, I hear the drinking song they're singing.
The world turned upside down. The world turned upside down.
Okay, so this represents the end of the Revolutionary War. America is now free from Great Britain, and so this seems like a good time to end the first of the 4 lectures. So, as Jerry